All right, sounds good. So yeah, so we'll go through what we refer to as the tractor build card project. We'll get into the details. First, start out working on this together with myself and then a friend of mine, Tom. Tom's not able to be here. He's at a tractor show down by Kansas City. So just kind of our bios. So I'm an Oliver collector. I'll show you some pictures of some of the tractors in my collection. I like to say I'm a retired farmer, so grew up on a farm in Minnesota, central Minnesota, corn and soybeans, and then when I went off to college, that's when I retired from farming. So, but as a kid, obviously, as soon as you're able to, you help out, right? My degree is in mechanical engineering. I work for Caterpillar Paving Products, so we're headquartered in Minneapolis. So that's my day job, and part of this is love tractor history, so that's kind of reason of the involvement. On Tom's side, he's a Massey Ferguson, Massey Harris, and preceding that is Wallace Tractor Company. So that's what he collects. So we'll get into the connection here in a few slides as well. His degree is in CNC machining, so he's self-employed. He's a machinist. He lately, up until now, he has been working on just solely kind of remanufacturing of the prairie tractors, just in the engine. So redoing, pouring bearings for the crankshafts, resizing rods, things like that for prairie type tractors. So that's kind of what he gets into. So he's from Fargo, North Dakota, and once again he loves tractor history. So that's kind of the common connection here. So these are some of the tractors in my dad's collection and my collection. So we've got some Super 99s here and a Massey Ferguson 98, which was built by the Oliver company here in Charles City. So my dad went to vocational school for diesel tech, fell in love with the Detroit diesel engines, so that's part of the reason we collect. You'll see some more pictures of these as well. So here's a couple more that we have. So over on the left there is the 2255, so that's kind of the biggest Oliver branded tractor, and then behind that is a 990. And then over on the right side, we've got a Super 99 with the 6-cylinder 302 cubic inch Waukesha, and then kind of the same vintage pipe plow, as they're referred to as the backbones pipe plow there, a six bottom. And then getting into some growing up on the farm, Dad basically repaired everything on himself. So him and I have basically rebuilt a lot of the tractors that we have. So we bring them in, and you can see we tear them basically down to nothing, rebuild them back up, and so once again they're ready to enjoy. Here's a couple more. So over on the left there is another Super 99 6-cylinder. So a lot of people don't know that the Super 99s were all built in South Bend, Indiana. So that's noted there. And then over on the right hand side there is some of the tractors that we bought in obviously repowered condition, any condition. So this one had a 318 Chrysler with an automatic in front of there, so in sad shape, but rounded up all the parts to put it back together. So that's kind of what we get into, and once again bring it back to life to enjoy. Tom, so this is where you'll start to see the connection of the 98. So this was his 98 that he found out in Montana. Had been there for many years, as you can see. So he needed some parts for the engine, so that's how he initially contacted me, probably about 3-4 years ago now, and we've stayed in touch ever since, and kind of getting into this together. So as I was putting this together, it's really trying to explain, where did the interest really come from? Why did we get involved with this project? So kind of calling it the connection and the spark. So over on the left is a picture that Tom and his grandpa took probably 20-25 years ago of a 98 pulling up in their area, as his grandpa would take him out to some tractor pulls and shows. So that's really where, at that point, Tom thought they were neat tractors, and someday I want to own one. So over on the right, it ends up being that we eventually purchased this tractor from this guy, and then through Tom and I's talking, I'm like, well, I own that tractor. That's the one that he, was very interested in growing up. So at that point, after Tom kind of bought his tractor, he knew the build card. So I think one time he was coming through Charles City here, stopped in and got the build card, was able to go down with Scott and see all the build cards and got his documentation. And from there, we'll call it Tom's interest. You know, he really wanted to define, well, how many were they built? And that's where I kind of piped up and said, I'm like, well, all the information's sitting in Charles City. We just have to go record it, right? So there began the challenge of how do we record all the numbers on here? As we'll see in the future slides, get into the details of how much information is on there. So another part of Tom's interest was the early Massey stuff. There's no records for, so he's kind of bummed out. And obviously, him and I are numbers guy, details guys from our occupations. We really wanted to know. So that's where, thankfully, the Floyd County Museum has all these tractor build cards, and we're able to document them. So that's kind of how we got involved and the reason behind it. But related back to an early interest from Tom, I really credit him to sparking this off and wanting to know. And now we're here, 2.5 years later from when we first set out here at Charles City, and kind of show you where we're at and what we've got compiled to this point. All right, so next slide here showing, here's all the tractor build cards that are in the Floyd County Museum. So we estimate there's about 253,000 build cards of all the tractors from 1954 up until about 1976. So how we estimated this is the punch cards here that I'll show you. IBM gives a number. There's about, if you measure like an inch thick, there's about 143 cards here. So we just got the tape measure out, opened up all the drawers, started measuring, and that was the estimate of how many cards we think are down there. We'll eventually, after we get them all compiled, we'll know, but so that's part of it. So we have listed there all the cards that are down there. The first card I'll show you is a Super 55. So then it runs all the way up to the 22 55s. So we have the Supers listed out there, the 55s, 66, 77s, and 88s. And that's just because over in the lower right-hand corner, showing you the Super 44s and Super 99s were all built in South Bend, and those were all on big sheets of paper. So there's no build cards of those, but there is information downstairs that can be accessed and provided as well, as far as the build dates and things like that. So then next up we have the 3-digit series. So we go all the way from the 440s all the way up through the 900 series, the 950s, 990s, mass produced 98s, and the 995s. One thing to note is production started in South Bend, Indiana for the 950s, 990s, and 995s. So there's a few build cards for those, but the majority of those are missing, or we have yet to find those. So which is kind of a bummer, because that's obviously what I'm interested in, so we won't be able to get like the full compilation since we don't have information from those South Bend tractors, but we have all the information from what was produced in Charles City. And I can't remember the exact date when they moved over, somewhere in 1959 when production switched over here to Charles City. And then after that, the first 100 series, 4 digits, the 1600s, 1800s, 1900s are downstairs, and then all of the 50 series, and then into the 55 series, all downstairs. And then there's also the Fiat tractors. There's build cards for those. So in the file, we haven't really touched those yet. Those will probably be at the very end when we get to those. So we'll have to see what those are about and how much information we can figure out with those build cards as well. So we'll go into a little bit about the IBM 80 punch card. So the IBM 80 punch card was introduced in 1930. There is some earlier versions of punch cards before that, but the IBM 80 basically became the standard, and that's what was used all the way up until 70s or beyond in industry, used by many companies. So obviously this is all pre-computers, pre-data storage. So this was your, your data storage, which is very little. roughly about 80 bytes of information on here, which isn't much. So that's where going back to once we compile all the 253,000 cards, basically your phone could have the capacity to store all of that data versus that many 250,000 cards, right? So which is just crazy on that. But like I say, many companies use this. Ford, GM, this drove all of their process. Chrysler, all their processes through their manufacturing as well. So the card, it's got 80 columns wide, so at the bottom, so there's basically 80 columns in here, and that's why it's called the 80. And then it's 12 rows. And the card can have letters, numbers, and special characters depending on how it's punched. So if there's just a single punch in the lower 10 rows, it'll just put that number at the top. Is kind of what that equates to. Now if you start punching a special character, so there's some dashes in all the serial numbers, so that comes from one of the first 2 rows, special characters. And then to get letters, there's 2 punches, one in the upper row and then one down in the lower row, and that's how they can get the special characters, letters, and numbers in there. So as we go through reading these punch cards, there's mistakes. The humans that punch these, made mistakes. So if there's a double punch, all of a sudden there'll be a letter up there, and we're looking for a number. So then we have to go back, pull the build card, and manually figure out which number it's supposed to be, and then correct that. So that's where the challenge becomes. It wasn't always not as simple as you think. Oh, we'll just read these, we'll be done. It's like, no, there's lots of mistakes in these cards that we have to go manually look up and fix. So that's just a little bit about the punch cards and how they're set up. So next up here, going to show you the first build card that's downstairs in the Floyd County Museum collection. So this is a Super 55, serial number 6001. So this tractor was built on 7/12/1954. So that's when they started utilizing this technology, the IBM punch cards. Have listed here, I don't know when the last punch card is downstairs, and I couldn't exactly remember the kind of the gap of missing records of punch cards to the tractor data sheets, records that are there. So there is a chunk. I think that's the right date range. McKenna's confirming. So we'll eventually see after we get things read, how many we have and what the latest date on those tractors are, or on the cards are.
For some reason, they're, AGCO was very emphatic about when the plant closed that they didn't care about the Oliver punch cards, but the white farm ones. So the early 2 105s and 85s and 2 150s and all that. AGCO has them. We don't know if they still have them.
Sure.
It was assumed they were in a salt mine cave in Kansas City.
Those elusive salt mine storage.
Yeah.
So that could definitely explain it if White wanted to retain the records for when they switched over to the White branded tractors. And
I didn't realize
turn
that was what
over
the story was. Is that AGCO wanted them?
Those.
I thought it was like a mistake almost that they went missing.
No, they were very emphatic about they wanted the white farm ones, not the Oliver.
Sure.
I didn't care anything about the
About the Olivers. So next up, I'll show you, there's 2 different types of cards. I refer to them as an early card and a late card. So the early cards, that's the upper one. So it starts out on the upper left corner, the tractor serial number, and then the engine serial number, and then the spec number, and then there's an A through Z code. So all the A through Z codes were 2 digits on the early cards. So they had enough room within those 80 columns to maintain the tractor serial number and engine serial number on the front. So the later type of card, when they were introducing more options and things like that, they needed more space, and then they introduced a 3-digit code number. So that took up 68 digits of that 68 columns of the 80 columns on there. So they didn't have enough room to leave that tractor and serial number on the front. So where that becomes troublesome is when we're reading these cards. It's great that it's on there because now I have it on the front, it's coded in. But when we go to these later cards, now I have no reference back to the tractor serial numbers just because it's handwritten on the back side. So that's where things become challenging of going back to finding, okay, that card had an error. How do I go look it up because I don't have easily the engine or the tractor serial number on the front. So that's where, as we process these, it becomes very time consuming to be able to go back and look them up if we need to.
So what year did that change? When was that?
That was basically when they introduced the 50 series. Is when that was roughly at the end of the hundreds into the 50 series. So here's the layout in a little more detail. So once again, the tractor serial number, those first 5 digits or 6 digits later on, I think. And then next, after the dash, that 3-digit is actually your transmission code. It's not actually the part of the serial number. Mm-hmm. And then after that, we have the engine serial number, and then we get into the specification number, and then your A through Z codes. I have a note there that the specification number is basically a unique number that represents the combinations of your A through Z codes. And there is kind of a way to break that down with some sheets. I think that Dwayne Starr and some others had come up with to decipher that if you don't have the codes handy. So that's just a few notes that I have there about that. And basically, there's many specification numbers. So anytime a unique config came in, then they would assign that a new number. Starting out, it's probably okay. Here's your standard tractor. And now, if you want to change wheel size, they would update the codes and then assign it a new spec number. Mm-hmm. And then, if you wanted wheel weights on top of that, there was a new spec number. So that's where it just grows from there. There's many of them, and eventually we'll be able to tell you how many different variations of tractors of each model, were built. But that's kind of the layout of the early card. The late card is pretty similar. Just remove the tractor serial number and engine serial number, and then the rest is the same. And then there's also a lot of handwritten notes on a lot of the cards. So just noting the one here that I had pulled up, and I just happened to have this one because it was stapled together. But this one had on the front, it was for a farm progress show. And a lot of them are stamped, special bill of material. Later on, when the Minneapolis Moline G650s and that, they'll be stamped Mini Mo on the front. Growing Osho. There's a lot of different things that are handwritten on the front. Mm. So we're unable to capture that because the reader is just purely looking at the punches, but the ones that we have to go through by hand, we are trying to document all the special notes on them because that'll be fun later. Of okay, here's some Growing Osho tractors, and here's some show tractors, just kind of some variations, or engineering experimental tractors, just to have some fun later. So we'll break down on how you read the cards here as far as your A through Z codes. So going back to the first one, so as you look at this, you go find your A code, and then on the sheets that McKenna provides with, or the museum provides with all the tractors, you just go on here and go find your A code. And for the Super 55s, there's only a few choices, so pretty easy. So this one was 02, so just have highlighted there, the adjustable tread. So then you just move on to the B series code, which is the engine code, gas or diesel, and you just keep moving through all the way through to figure out how your tractor was optioned out using these code sheets that are sent out with the build card service. So I just wrote it down here. So this was, just an adjustable tread, gas, standard transmission, no belt pulley, 540 PTO, your 12.4 by 28, tires on it, press steel wheels for that. no wheel weights. So that's kind of how you go through and read them. So here is kind of a listing of all the A through Z codes. So pretty much, I think A through U was pretty standard. You know, everything was the style of tractor, you know, what engine, gas, diesel, LP, variations for transmissions, you know, high-speed transmissions. Once you get into the later tractor, there's quite a few more PTO options, depending on, you know, what shaft needed to go in there with hydropowers or creeper gears, you know. So pretty much standard all the way through U, which is the steering, and after that, V through Y kind of varied a bit. Some of the tractors, the early ones, they didn't use these columns just because they didn't have that many options. And then later on, you can see I listed out a few of the others that show up later. You know, rear-mounted equipment, different levels of sheet metal on the rear that would go with your cab options, front-mounted equipment. So like Super 55s would have forklifts on the back, so that's where some of that would be tractor loader, you know, prep or ready, some of the front-mounted equipment. And then the Y codes get pretty crazy once we get into the 50 series and 55 series with all the cabs and all the variation of cabs that were provided or cab ready, as they could be ordered to put on cabs at the branch house or the dealer. And then the Z code is just batteries, dry cell batteries, wet cell batteries, shipping without batteries, just a few variations in there. So now we'll get into a little bit of, you know, some of the trial and error that we got into trying to figure this huge project out. So this is kind of after, you know, obviously we did the first ones by hand, and after that we're like, there's no way we're going to be able to do 250,000 cards by hand. It's just not possible, or we need an army of people to do so. Because after typing after a while, man, your hand gets really cramped up. So it's just not possible. So then from there, YouTube research, came across people, you know, trying to solve the same problem of how do I get this data off of obsolete technology, obsolete media, and that's where it came across. Basically taking a picture of the card or an image of that card, and then detecting the punches in it. So I was like, oh, okay, we can try this out. I have a pretty smart nephew that came up with the software that you're seeing over on the right-hand side. So what he did, he took just kind of a standard webcam and mounted that, 3D printed some stuff here. A place to put the card consistently, that was very important. But what you're seeing here over on the right is actually the image that this camera was looking at that card, and that's where the software that he wrote could go in and detect those punches. So they would show up as, you know, black background that we have there, and then turn those green in his software. So that way, same thing, you can look at this visually when we were processing it, to be like, yep, the green blocks are in the right spot. And then from there, he put the digits of what it will be that the software is detecting and going to report out up here, same way it's, you know, red on the card, and then basically capture that and then dump that into a spreadsheet. So this works, and I'll, like I say, I'll talk about later. Definitely would shorten up the time, but still very time consuming. So we still felt that we could not process all 250,000 cards using this method. But it is possible through this method that it works. So we'll go back into the equipment. So just went out and grabbed a couple snapshots of the equipment that was used with these cards. So over on the left there is the punch card machine. So that's where somebody, you know, would be in front of that and take in however the orders came in, A through Z codes, and then they would manually type it out like a typewriter, if you will, to punch the cards. And then the one unique thing that Oliver had was it also printed across the top. So I don't know if that was very common or unique to Oliver, or how many different companies, but it's nice that that number was printed across the top so you could see what it was, because otherwise going down and always looking for counting down which punch it was in can drive you crazy too. So that's where the people would first get that order, cards would get punched, and then this is where I don't know what happened next with these cards, because you wouldn't punch them for no reason. They probably went somewhere to a punch card reader, such as the machine over on the right, read them and start driving the material probably to the assembly line to build that next tractor. So the punch card reader over on the right, you can see there is about the size of a table, very, very large. So as probably all technologies, equipment, especially electronics, it starts out very, very large, just like cell phones, and then all of a sudden it became very much smaller compared to the unit that we have, which I have sitting over on the table over there, a tabletop version. So became probably reduced the size of them by 5x, but that's what probably would have been around here at what the factory used in punching the cards and driving that bill of material to manufacture. So the punch card reader that we came across is from the 1970s, and it's a Documation brand. So they had various models that can read cards from anywhere from 150 a minute all the way up to 600 a minute. So the model that we have here reads at 300 cards per minute. So this is where my time estimates with the punch cards that we did by hand, so the Massey 98s, there's 501 build cards, and that took about 15 hours to type all of that in by hand. The information on the front, the 80 columns, plus the information on the back side, which has your build date, ship date, where it was shipping to, branch houses, things like that. So we estimate at that rate, it'd take you somebody, 3.75 years, so almost 4 years to go do that work. And your hand would probably give out before that with just manually typing. And that's kind of another part of the story. Tom, since he's a CNC machinist, he's like, they always have to type in code to the machine. So he's like, I'm pretty fast. So that's where he's like, we can do the 500 cards, but still ended up taking 15 hours to do so. So that's from there. We didn't think it was possible to do by hand. So that's where the visual method came in. We think we could get that down to just over 2 years, but still very time consuming. You're still grabbing a card, placing it in there. If it's nice and flat, it goes pretty quick, but if there's any type of curvature, then that throws the camera off, and then it starts not detecting those punches in the right spot. So we could probably process that out, but still we're like, at 2 years it'd be still probably not possible. Knowing that there's punch card readers out there that can read these things at the rates of 300 a minute, you can process these things in roughly 4 weeks if all is well and goes well too. And there's a lot of nuances with that. So that's kind of the journey. We started out by hand, roughly came down here, I think it was about 2.5 years ago. Did what we wanted to, the Massey 98s, the 990s, that series by hand, and that's where McKenna and Dean and Scott at that time were telling us about this bigger project that people would like to do, and that's where two of us, couldn't stop thinking about it of, hey, it'd really nice to have all this information, and that's where our minds just went from there. So that's where we trialed the visual detection method. It was like good results, but still not fast enough. Led us to the card reader, which, funny enough, popped up on eBay from a gentleman just south of here, probably about 45 minutes. That's Corey is his name. He basically collects electronics, as he was a software and electrical engineer for John Deere. He's since retired from there. So he had this reader that read at 300 a minute that he was selling, but he also had a different model, the smaller model at 150 cards a minute. and the reader, as we got it, was non-functional. We bought it that way. Tom worked on it a while, was struggling with trying to make heads or tails of it. So then I got it from him. I know some working in development. I know some retired electrical engineers. I'm like, they probably know or worked with these machines. So I brought it over to them. We did a bunch of troubleshooting, figured some stuff out. And then in the meantime, we had got back in touch with Corey at one of our trips down here to the museum, and kind of showed him what we were up to. And since we knew he loved history as well, we bait him and set the hook for him to get involved. And he was gracious enough to take the card reader back after the troubleshooting. We had rounded up some parts after scouring the internet for some of the circuit boards and some of the troubleshooting that I had done with a friend of mine. And at that point, brought him the extra parts and the reader back, and then from there he took it over, returned it to functioning condition, and then also he built the interface to go from the 1970s technology to a modern laptop. So this is the little guy here, an Arduino is what they're referred to as. So that takes the information coming out of the reader, all those ones and zeros, processes that through the software to be able to put that into the laptop. So he was very instrumental in speeding up the process. Otherwise, Tom and I would probably still be working on getting it functioning and then getting that interface made. So a lot of credit goes out to him in doing so. Like I say, he's kind of, him and his wife are history buffs as well. But just his expertise on the electrical side was a huge benefit to us, making this all possible. So here is just some raw data coming from the card reader. So this is where you'll see the 80 columns coming in. So it's just one big long, kind of refer to it as a text string with spaces in there. And so that's where, as read, that's where you'll start seeing some person added a space or forgot to put the dash in there or double typed a number, so that number didn't come through. So that's where you had to go back and look up all the cards. Here's an extra Y hanging out. So this is where, after we get it read, the work's not done. So that's where Tom and I spent many hours cleaning up this data so we can make it accurate, so we can eventually tally up all of that information. So quite a bit of time, and that's where 500 cards aren't so bad, but now you start talking 250,000 cards, now it becomes overwhelming. So that's where we're chugging through it. If things are good, it goes well. If it's not, it just takes lots of time. And so then after it cleaned some data up there as much as we could, then I went forward and got some formulas here to take that one big long string of numbers and then start breaking it out into the tractor serial numbers, engine serial numbers, and spec numbers, and then individually all your A through Z codes are in columns now here. So that way, through some formulas and spreadsheets, we can go through and tally up how many dual front tractors were made, and then you can go count the next, going back to that, decode sheet, however many, A codes are in there. We'll just go through and count them up, and then we have the final, statistics of how many were there. And Dwayne and the others in the past, identified what they could, but there's, now we're coming across missing ones that haven't been identified. So that's, the next, question within this, quest that we have, trying to get those identified so we can, what were they? So we can ultimately at the end be confident in the numbers that we have, and be able to share that with others of here's what was done, here's what left Charles City as the tractors were manufactured. So that's kind of the process of, okay, we read them, got to do some work, then we get it into the spreadsheet, and then we can start tallying everything up. So that'll be the end goal. So that's just an example of just kind of the A spec there that we have, or the A code. So here is kind of the tally of the Massey Ferguson 98 statistics. So this is what Tom had pulled together. So now we can tell you exactly, what we have. We have the actual stats, no more made up numbers, because people out on Facebook, anywhere else, are like, oh, I have a really rare tractor, there's only 2 of these made, and it's like, where did you get your information? Until you've done all the work, I don't know where you're getting your information. So that's part of us as well, being detailed orientated that we are with the numbers and the stats. We like to know, we like to be precise. So that drives Tom and I nuts. So now that's part of why we're doing this. So here, just kind of the 900 series has an optional hand clutch or foot clutch. So now we have the exact numbers that were produced that way. There was also an option of 2 shift levers between the high and low gauge or range. So now like I say, here's the fun of it, tell you exactly how many were produced, how they were configured. The rear wheels, 26-inch wheels or 34s, heavy hubs, light hubs, is all in here now from getting it all in the spreadsheet, all cleaned up in what we have. So these are kind of the results of it. One thing to note, kind of special on the 98s, there's only 16 variations of them, and that might be special just due to potentially how Oliver allowed Massey to order those numbers or order those tractors. They maybe just didn't let them go, order one-offs or whatever. They probably said, here's a list, we're going to pick from this list, and this is what we can get you, not just put in special orders to the factory. So that's one theory on why there's only 16 variations of them. So what Tom did here, just kind of from the spec numbers, once again, he just kind of broke out what each of them were in high-level description. But now we have of the 501 we built, here's how they were configured. So that's where we have the highest volume at 114, and we did have one-off of some of those tractors. But these are the results. Eventually, this is what we'll have for all the Oliver tractors as we chug through and get them all pulled together. But we'll share where we're at with our journey here. Another fun piece of information, since we recorded all the information on the backside, which had the shipping destination on them, it was kind of fun to see. He put a cool map together here of where they all went, and the bigger the bubble, it means more tractors were shipped there. And with this, the big bubble up here, so this was a Fargo branch, so a lot of them probably got shipped there and then spread out. Obviously we know a lot went up into Canada, and then the other branch house here down at Kansas City, they had a lot of tractors, must have came through there. So obviously we don't know where they went after that, but they did have other shipping destinations near where they went. But it's just kind of fun to see, where did these Wheatland standard tractors all go. We were a little surprised when we started typing them in. That's kind of the beginning of production. A lot of them went south, which didn't quite make sense to us. Probably don't know why, and how many kind of over here into this area, down to the Memphis branch and down into Alabama. But, there was a rice field version, so that was some of them. But just interesting information to us as start opening up the questions. The fun about it. What's intriguing about it. Digging deeper into kind of the story, which probably never know, but be able to speculate about.
So Derek, the Fargo and Kansas City, that was a Massey branch. That wasn't the Oliver branch?
I'm assuming it was the Oliver branch, but I don't know how they would have distributed off to the Massey dealers. We just don't know.
So they went to the Oliver.
I'm assuming that's our guess, since they were on there, but we just don't know how that interaction worked. So I also obviously coming across some fun build cards that in here, so I just have some slides showing a few of them. So this here was a 2255 engineering tractor, has obviously all handwritten notes on it. There's a serial number. Looks like it was taken from one tractor, moved over to another one before it was sold off. But this is some of the stuff that we come across of all of a sudden is like a card without any punches. Like, what's this about? Did the machine, have mishap, or what happened? But no, it's a blank card, so that's where we have to go back and look once again. So that's where, as we get through these, that's some of the stuff that we'll be able to provide in the future. Here's some engineering tractors that probably are of interest to people later on. And here's another one. So this was the first 1900, as it was on the build card, built by the experimental department. And same thing, this one all of a sudden it had the punchings for or the punches in the card for the tractor serial number, but no others. So that's why I had to go back and take a look. And so this tractor apparently got shipped over to BG Corporation with no serial number on it, but as they were cleaning up assets, they had to provide it with the serial number. So it's a much later serial number than what they started production with. But same thing, it's just the fun of seeing what's on these cards, and some of how Oliver operated back in the day. Here's some more, just some fun ones. There's stories of these tractors obviously went down the assembly line, and apparently they were in a spot where they could get painted. I don't know if anybody knows where that was on the tractor and how they all got so much paint on them. But just some of the stuff that we come across. And then over on the right is just a picture as we're going through, as that card reader stops. Tom and I have to make the decision of why did it stop? Did it read it? There's some different error codes that pop up on the reader. So this is just where we have to stop. If the card is misread, kind of pull that out of the stack, continue on. But then we have to go photo those and enter those by hand, since the reader couldn't read them. So this is just us, pictures of us of how we process. And then the other side of processing, as the return tractors came back, they would get 2 build cards, and a lot of them are stapled together. So the punch card reader does not like stapled cards. So that's where we have to spend a whole bunch of time up front, we kind of squeeze them, looking for gaps where there might be a staple, and then flip through them to make sure there's bits and pieces of paper in between, and sometimes as well find all that stuff so we don't damage our reader, because these things are hard to come across, and if it breaks down, that might be the end of it until we can go find another reader. So that's where we're pretty cautious on trying to find that, but it's very time consuming as well. It doesn't allow us to get through as fast as we'd like, but we know it's an important part, because finding spare parts for this thing is extremely difficult. So that's where we're trying to protect it and to get through all of this. A few more cards. So this is where I mentioned before some of the stampings. So this was a mini mow tractor in the 1755s, which equates to your G 650. There's some extra stamps that I had on here, and then same thing, all painted green. There's just blotches of green everywhere. So I don't know if the painters had fun just shooting the information, making people mad of painting pieces of paper, the assembly process, but whatever have you. And then I thought I'd throw these up there as well, so like I say, these punch cards, drove the business operated around these punch cards. So these are just some service parts that I had of, some tickets, I'm assuming, that are specially printed, that, would get tore off. There's some information on them, but you can see what Oliver had them later, specially printed, for white, but I don't know how they're all used, so I didn't know if anybody out there knows, or be able to tell us that used to work for White or Oliver, anything about how the card was used within the tractor manufacturing process, or even with the service parts side of it. So that's just Tom and I have lots of questions around that. I think it'd be fun to document if we could tell, okay, here's your order, here's how it got punched, where did the cards go from there. Others that told us, there's multiple cards punched, but only one got saved and went into the file for service documentation purposes. But learning more about that, I think, would be eventually, as we're all looking for more connection to our tractors, or more connection back to Charles City in the manufacturing process. So I think eventually someday, if we can, kind of map that out, is one of the ideas that we have. But like I said, these cards had to be everywhere. So what's next for the project? So noted here, we've read probably about 120,000 cards, just short of that, which consists of the supers and the 3 digits. Got into some of the 4-digit stuff. So really what we're up to now is just cleaning up all the data from what we read. So we kind of did that over the winter. We're busy over the summer, so just trying to get the stuff cleaned up now. And then from there, we want to identify as many codes as we can. Kind of add to the sheets, the code sheets that we have. So as we get stuff tallied up in the spreadsheet I showed you earlier, be able to identify as much as possible. So that way we can start making some of this information available later this year is kind of the goal. And then from there, we'll probably resume next winter as our schedules align, come back and keep reading the 4-digit tractors, and then have more data clean up after that. So that's kind of our plan. So like I said, we've been into it about 2.5 years now. We'll probably continue on for another 1 to 2 years, let's say, before we kind of get to the end of this. Obviously, like I say, it's very daunting. You can do one, it's very simple, but I don't think I'd have anybody raise their hand that they can do 250,000 of these, invest that time.
Yeah.
So that's where we're just going through and cleaning things up with that. So that's where we're up to. So it's been quite a bit of fun so far. We're obviously seeing cool stuff come out of it. Eventually, when we get there, answering a lot of questions, getting to the bottom of things. Kind of jumped over a little bit. Go back here and kind of share how the card reader works. So over on the right hand side here, this is where you load all the unread cards. So you can put them in there in stacks, and then it goes through here. There's what's they refer to as a picker head. So it pulls a vacuum on the card, and it grabs it, and then it rotates, and then there's a couple, or there's a series of spinning wheels in here. So once that picker head pulls that vacuum, turns, and it sucks it in, and that's what sends the card through the reader. So this is where for 300 a minute, this picker head is doing that 5 times a second. So that's how fast these things are zinging through here. And over on this side as well, there's air being blown at the cards to get them separated. Now that's another fun part of getting these processed. The stack that I have here that I'll run through the reader, very clean cards. They're nice and flat, but that's where the air, called the fluffer, gets these cards separated out because they might be sticking together from humidity or anything like that. So that way that picker head can pull that vacuum one by one and spin it through the wheels and get it processed. And as it goes through, it gets processed, it just starts stacking the cards back up over here, the same order that they went through. And now these machines, I'm very impressed by these machines for the reason they're doing it so fast, and it's got kind of sensors in here, mechanical sensors, that as it's going through here, it detects the front edge of the card, so that's like a trigger, and then from there, it knows how fast it should see that first punch. So if it doesn't see that, that's where the card reader will air out and stop. So there's some cards that have corners torn off, so it doesn't see that trigger till later, and it'll basically air out or fault out. But then from there, it reads all 80 punches in the card if they're there, and this reader does it through optical. So it's got a sensor that looks through, shines that light through from the signal side to the receiver side, and can detect where that punch is at. So there's a row of 12 of those sensors sitting there as it comes through. The earlier ones that doing some investigation, researching, they must have operated much slower, but they had, I think, metal actually detect, kind of pop through that could sense that. But obviously, as they develop the technology, find ways to make it smaller by doing it optically, can do it much faster. So that's a little bit on how it works. So pretty cool piece of machinery. Same thing as we got into this, we're running this thing, for 8 hours a day. We're like, when's it going to break down on us? From being from the 1970s, and we're, brought it back out, dusted it off, and putting it through its paces, trying to read all these cards. We did have a breakdown, I think that was back in March. The little picker head that was in there, where it pulls the vacuum, the two pieces were glued onto it, and one of the pieces fell off, so it would no longer pull a vacuum. So that brought our trip to a halt. So I had to bring it back home, take it apart, get it repaired, and things are together using feeler gauges, to set, the clearances and stuff, so it all works together. So it's very, very, kind of, to me, finicky and touchy. I think it's like a, Swiss watch inside there. And that was part of the reason, after kind of doing troubleshooting as well, is bringing it back to Corey, the expertise of somebody that knows what they're touching and knows, some of the consequences of touching some of those things on the circuit boards and getting it set back up. So I think that comes to the end of what I had prepared. Like I say, I can turn on the reader and show everybody here. We can take a video of that as well. Kind of show everybody, how it works. Neat piece of machinery, as it's, like I say, blowing air at the cards to get them separated, pulling vacuum on them, and spinning them through the reader, getting the information compiled. I don't know if there's any questions in the room that people have.
One shout out to the people listening is to help us solve these codes. If they get a build card and it's got where we can't identify that code, maybe they can help us by saying, here's what this tractor has in that code, so we can back into that,
eventually figure it out.
Cracking that code.
Correct. Yeah.
It seems like that code is a moving target. It's different. Every tractor model, every code
changed a bit.
Changed. Yeah.
Yeah. The tires, they kept that and go back up
common.
To. They kept that common. The tires, they kept that common no matter what model it was. But say for PTO, for example, there was different numbers for just your standard 540 PTO, which makes it difficult. So yeah, so out on Facebook, people have posted some of the information. I've contacted them, asked them some questions as we go to try to figure some of that stuff out. Even some of the we'll call it road roller tractors. They'll have a specification, but no A through Z codes. So that's where same thing. We're trying to go through of, okay, can we figure this out? We'd like to tie a value to it, so eventually, we can get things. Say there's 500 of them, we can add things up to 500, because now we're going to have, say 50 of them didn't have a code. We can tell you what 450 of them are, but not all 500.
Yeah.
So that's where gaps come in as well. And I've noticed even for military tractors, that somebody's posted out on Facebook too, that some of the codes weren't there for those. So that's where we'll be able to figure some of that out, but it's going to take time, finding these tractors with those missing codes, because there's some of the rarer options. And me kind of speculating as well, a lot of stuff is probably known for the agricultural tractors, but we'll say industrial tractors. A lot of this stuff came from the price pages that the dealers had, because they'd have what the A through Z codes on them. So that's where people probably have your price pages, or those dealer price pages for the agricultural tractors, but not probably your industrial tractors or your military tractors or the special bill of material tractors. So that's where it'll probably take some time, but we'll see if we can get them identified, and if those tractors are still around, if they still exist. And a lot of tractors, or obviously if the tractor's 50 to 70 years old, it's been reconfigured, you've got different engines in there, so that's like a lot of the things that McKenna and the others field of, hey, I've got this Super 88 with this engine number, and nope, it's actually 770 engine in there,
Yeah.
So that's some of the stuff you find too. Backing in, the tractor serial number from your engine serial number, some of the stuff that you come across. But that's where, trying to separate out eventually, what is that road roller stuff. There's the summary logs down there, what came off the assembly line. There's tallies in there for some of the road roller stuff. So that's where I'm trying to go back, look up some of those, what those spec codes are, and then go through, filter out in here, and kind of document, hey, these are all road roller stuff, and try to, I think, what we'll probably end up with is, I think these are the 660s that I'm showing here of, here's how many 660 road roller tractors are. We don't know how they were configured, but here's the egg tractors, or what became a tractor. Here's the stats behind that tractor. So it's gonna, like I say, take some time to get there, but that's how we'll have to deal with the information that we have and account for the gaps that we may never know through some of this. So like I said, when we got into this, we knew there'd be questions, but there was a lot more questions. Missing pieces of information, a lot of one-off codes that are out there. So that's where I put them in the spreadsheet as question marks, and then eventually have McKenna go look them up, or when I'm back here, we go look those up and see if there's something off with the reader, get them corrected, or nope, those were one-offs. And just have to mark them as that if it's a question mark. And that's where, as we go through here as well, as far as we can talk about rarity of tractors, what makes a rare tractor. I don't know if that will change through all of this. Collectors, depending on their viewpoints of what's a rare Super 88, when they made, I can't remember, 13,000 of them, 10,000 or 13,000 of them, what sets one off or the other, versus you jump into the 50 series and you introduce the front wheel assist tractors, and those tallies are changing as we go through here as well. But it's going to be people's opinion on, you may have a one-off spec code, but it could be because that tractor didn't get shipped with batteries versus one that did, and it had a unique number. So we'll see what comes from there. I don't know if it'll change the minds or opinions or not, but we'll get things tallied up, and all I can do is present the data that the cards are telling us, and also eventually there's a lot of numbers that have been published in the past through various books, through various magazines, so we'll state here as well what we have, what the numbers tell us, and they are different even from what was tallied up on those summary sheets. So that could have been just error in reading those summary sheets, but there's stuff in there that's not labeled, or in a group of tractors there was one peeled out, since Oliver did us the wonderful favor of just whatever tractor came off the assembly line got the next numerical number, whether it was a 77, 88, 66, whatever order you want to say. So that'll be a cool part as well for the early stuff. We'll eventually be able to throw these all into one big list and see if there's any gaps, and that would tell us if there's any missing cards, if you will, as well, if we can get these all in order to account for them, and trying to do our diligence just to get to the most accurate numbers that we can provide as well, because this will probably be the new benchmark on here's how many were built and here's how many this way, that way, from that aspect of it. So that'd be a cool piece here. So that's where we're trying to focus on, that early stuff, where the serial numbers are on there, and get those tallied up. So lots of questions that we have on the cards. Trying to think, there's one more that I just had that I can mention, but it's slipping my mind now. Oh, the Charles City also manufactured transmissions that went into the combines. So they got assigned serial numbers as well, even though it was a transmission that went over to, can't remember what plant that was. Battle Creek, Michigan. Yeah, thank you. So those are, there's cards in here as well for those in the 3-digit models. The earlier ones from the supers, those cards aren't in there. But they're all listed on the summary sheets, so that's where same thing, you know, to get this all tallied up or all in numerical order, that's where you have to include those combine serial numbers to eventually figure out what's missing, what's not missing. But it's just kind of interesting that they gave those transmissions a tractor serial number as well, and that transmission went off into combines.
And
so
they're just stuffed in one of our drawers.
Yep, they're mixed in with the rest of them, so
Yeah.
that's where you come across batches of, oh, what's this? You know? It's, you know,
Weird.
more questions, you know, that we've answered along the way as well. So that's where, yeah, it's, you know, as we got into this, I was like, oh, we'll just read them, we'll have it, sum them up, we'll be done. But many questions here to answer, and, you know, and that's part of the journey, reaching out to various folks, seeing what they have for information, looking through price pages if they have them. We've found more stuff on those price pages, so we'll close the gap or identify more that we have. But yes, I'll be trying to reach out to more people that I can think of, or if there's more people listening here that see this eventually. If you have price pages, you know, we'd like to take a look at them, especially if you have industrial ones. I'd be very curious about those, to see if we can identify some of the stuff that we're missing and gaps that we have. But,
You know, this, from a museum standpoint, and you know, this is a project that probably envisioned, I'd say, 10 years ago, and without you and Tom, it had never happened. And you know, we had gone down various paths, spent a lot of money on maybe having cards scanned, and it just didn't work. I mean, we just couldn't get to this point, you know, and so it just took time and other minds,
The right people.
and the right people to think, now this is, you know, 'cause we didn't even know there was a presentation given to the board a number of years ago. The company was going to do it, we were going to put it all up in the cloud, and the museum was very nervous about that because it couldn't be accessed by anyone, and this is a very important revenue stream for us.
Yeah.
So, and we appreciate what you and Tom have done. It's just your patience is way beyond belief.
Well, and you guys have like the right motive too, because it's just like interesting to you. So
Yeah,
you're just like,
correct.
and you're willing to volunteer your time. So we like
Yeah.
super appreciate it, because you know.